Here we are in the classroom at the Tallgrass Prairie Center, and we've made our site visit. We've gone out and looked at the different characteristics of the planting site, and now we need to move into an area to actually start getting closer to designing a seed mix. Before that, though, I'd like to show you a little graphic, and this really illustrates well how soils are as far as their wetness or their dryness as it relates to their position in the landscape. And as you can see, you start on the left-hand side with an aquatic pond, and that's basically standing water year-round. And then you have the high water mark. That high water mark gets into what we call the wet or hydric soil. And wet soils can be inundated for a week or 2 weeks or even longer, but sometime during the growing season they will eventually dry out, and then the cycle goes over and over again from being wet to dry. Further up on the slope you have something in between, which is wet mesic, and these are soils that can be inundated, but for a very brief time. Most of the time during the growing season, these soils will be dry, but there'll be plenty of moisture available for plant growth. That's wet mesic soils. Then the next level of soils, as you go up further on the landscape or go upslope, are mesic soils, and these are moist soils. And traditionally here in Iowa, mesic soils are the highest producer of corn and soybeans. These are the highest productive soils in the state of Iowa. And likewise, mesic soils promote quite a bit of growth of the native prairie vegetation also. As you go further up the slope, the soils become a little bit drier, and we have a category called dry mesic. This is something in between really dry soils and moist soils. And then, as you can see on the illustration, as we start getting to those steeper slopes, we'll get into what are dry soils. And there's definitely a suite of prairie species that are best adapted to dry soils. Once you get up the slope and you get to the top of the hill, the soils can become mesic again. And so it's really a continuum. And we'll go through the soils map to look at some of those characteristics, but it really, again, is the site visit that's the most important thing to do as far as determining whether you have wet mesic soils, dry mesic soils, or dry soils. And again, the goal is to match the species to the soil moisture that they're most adapted to. I get quite a few questions about planting prairie, and one of the most common questions that I get asked is what do I plant and how do I know what to plant? And it definitely is a good question to ask. And so today I brought out some literature and some resources to help you determine what species you need to plant and should plant. Most of these resources are in Iowa, but if you contact your local library in your state or your local DNR office, Department of Natural Resources office, they should be able to have species lists of preserves in your area. So just to show you a little bit about some of these references, this is one of the ones that I use most frequently, I think, out of all of them, and this is the Illustrated Guide to Iowa Prairie Plants by Christensen and Mueller. And this is a fairly comprehensive list of tallgrass prairie plants. There's nice line drawings in there, and what's most important is it has an Iowa map for each of the species, and each county that has a dot in it has a historical record of that species occurring in that county. And so it's very easy just to go through this book and determine which species are native to your county and which are not. And that's one good start. There's also great cultural information in here as far as flowering time and the habitat preference on this particular species. This is lead plant. It's frequent on dry and mesic prairies, also along woodland edges. So it kind of gives you an idea what type of habitat this each one of these species really prefers. And so you get a distribution, you get a habitat preference, you get flowering color and flowering time. This is one of the most used books that I think of all the prairie references that I use anyhow. Another book that was produced here in Iowa by Larry Eilers and Dean Rosa. This is the Vascular Plants of Iowa. As you can see, there are no line drawings in here, and so you pretty much have to know the vegetation as you go through this manual. And it's listed by genus species names, so you have to go in the back and you have to look under the common name if you don't know the scientific name, and then you have to go back and find it by the scientific name. Again, it shows you distribution. It'll say common throughout Iowa, if it's native or not native, where you might find it. And again, this is really a comprehensive list of all the vascular plants in Iowa. This has trees, shrubs, native, non-native vegetation, and so this is much more comprehensive as far as plants goes in the state of Iowa, whereas Christensen just lists the native plants. Two other publications that deal with reconstruction and restoration of prairie in Iowa, tallgrass prairie, is the Tallgrass Prairie Center Guide to Prairie Restoration in the Upper Midwest. And I've got a page marked here in one of the chapters, Designing a Seed Mix. There are sample seed mixes in here, and it tells you how many seeds per square foot that you might want to use for this particular given mix. There are mixes in here for mesic soils, dry soils, and wet mesic soils. And so, again, this is a good reference for at least figuring out what species to use in your seed mix. Likewise, the Tallgrass Prairie Restoration Handbook, this was published in 1997. It's a little bit older, and by Packard and Mutel. And again, I have a page marked, and they also have species lists in here, but they have it by short grass planting, midgrass and tall grass planting. And so it's organized a little bit differently, but nonetheless, there's a nice list of native species, and it will tell you how much of that seed you need of each of the species. You can tell I use this quite a bit because I have a bunch of markings in here. And before we published the other book, this was my go-to book as far as figuring out which species to put and where. It's still a very good book. There are other published papers, at least here in Iowa. One was put out by Thomas Rosberg. He's a biology professor at Drake University. He has compiled a list of what he considers are plants that have a statewide distribution and plants that are nearly statewide, and he has it listed by genus, species name, and common name. Again, a great reference, and one that is based in scientific literature and herbarium specimens. So it's a very good paper, and I suspect that your state probably will have a comprehensive species list that's very similar to Rosberg's list here in Iowa. Carl DeLong and Craig Hooper put out a paper for understory of oak savannas in Iowa, which are another native tallgrass prairie system, except for this particular habitat or system has evolved under varying canopies of shade, and there's a nice comprehensive list of species that he lists in here if you do have a savanna-like planting site.